Impossible outcomes are a result of things that begin in division.
Ain't that right? He ain't lying.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Alpha and Omega Exponent, where we share content to add value to your life. My name is Parfait, and we are continuing on our story time. So, the story time of today is the story about who was the first mighty man on earth. And it's also the story time about how at one point the whole earth had only one language. This is a story time of Genesis chapter 10 and chapter 11. Before we get started, make sure you like the video, share, comment, and most importantly, make sure you go back and watch the previous video to catch up on what we learned and the story time of last time of what we talked about, so that everything that I will say in this video will make sense clearly. So, without further ado, let's get started with today's video. Get your tea, get your coffee, your drinks, sit down, and let's get started. So, to pick up from where we left last time, in the previous story in chapter 9, we learned about how Noah got drunk and lay butt naked in his tent, and one of his sons, Ham, came and saw him, went out and told his other two brothers, Shem and Japheth, and the other two brothers came back and they covered their father, Noah. And then after Noah woke up and found out everything that took place, he decided to bless his other two sons who covered him, Shem and Japheth. But he decided to curse not his son Ham, who saw him naked, but his grandson Canaan. So in today's story, we're basically learning about the descendants of Noah. And through the descendants of Noah, we're going to hear about who was the first mighty man. And in chapter 10, in verse 6, it talks about the descendants of Ham. And Ham was the son of Noah, who saw him drunk and naked in his tent. So in verse 6 of chapter 10, it says, the sons of Ham, Cush, Egypt, Put, and Canaan. And if you remember Canaan was Noah's grandson who was cursed because his father Ham saw Noah drunk and naked in the tent. And in verse 7, he continues and he says, the sons of Cush, Sheba, Havilah, Sapta, Rama, and Sapteka. The sons of Rama, Sheba, and Dedan. In verse 8, it says, Cush father Nimrod. He was the first on earth to be a mighty man. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Therefore, he said, like Nimrod, a mighty hunter before the Lord. The beginning of his kingdom was Babel, Erech, Akkad, and Calneh in the land of Shinar. So, the first mighty man on earth was this man named Nimrod. Who was Nimrod? Nimrod was a descendant of Ham. He was a descendant of Canaan, who was one of Noah's grandson, who he cursed because his father Ham saw him naked. The story and kind of the lesson from this story that we really take away is that Noah cursed his grandson Canaan, but God used Canaan. Through him came out the first mighty man on earth. So the lesson here is really about how the curse of a man will never supersede the will of God. God can still accomplish his will on earth no matter what anybody says to you, no matter what anybody tries to put on you. So that is really the lesson in this kind of short story in chapter 10. Now we're going to go into chapter 11. So in chapter 11, in the beginning, verse 1, and he says, now the whole earth had one language and the same words. Can you imagine if the whole earth had only one language and the same words? I can't even imagine how the word could have been, how the word would be. if we all only had one language and the same words, the things that we can do and how we'll be able to understand everybody and everyone. So that's a conversation for another day. But moving on in this story, in verse 3, it begins and it says, "And they said to one another, 'Come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly.' And they had bricks for stone and bitumen for mortar. Then they said, 'Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves, lest we disperse over the face of the whole earth.'" So these people at that time got together and decided that, okay, we're gonna build this tower that will have its top in the heaven instead of us dispersing on the earth. So now what happens next after they decided to do this? And in verse 5 all the way down, this is what we see what happens next. And in verse 5 it begins and it says, "And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the children of the man had built. And the Lord said, Behold, they are one people, and they have all one language. And this is only the beginning of what they will do, and nothing that they propose to do will now be impossible for them." So after the people got together, decided to build this tower, God was like, okay, I'm gonna come down and see what they're doing. And when God found out that they're gonna build this tower with its top in the heavens, and God said that, okay, they got together and nothing that they do will be now impossible for them. What do we take away from this story here? I think the most kind of some of the important messages to take away here is that these people were working first in unity, because in the story we hear how it says they were saying to one another, "Come, let us." So they were including everyone. They say one language, everyone was in unity. They said, "Come, let us make bricks," and they came together. They said, "Come, let us build this tower," and they came together to do this thing. So they were all working in unity to accomplish all the goals they were setting for one another. And because they were working in unity, they got the attention of God. So the message and the takeaway is that when you work in unity, you get the attention of God. When you have a project, when you're working with people, or when you want to accomplish something that involves other people, it's important to work in unity, because when you work in unity, that's when you will be able to get God's attention in whatever you have going on, in whatever that you want to accomplish. And also, what we have to know is that when you work in unity, nothing is impossible, because we see here how God himself said that, and the Lord, in verse 5 it says that, "And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the children had built." And in verse 6 it says, "And the Lord said, Behold, they are one people, and they have one language, and this is only the beginning of what they will do, and nothing that they propose to do now will be impossible for them." So when you work in unity, nothing that you propose will be impossible to do it. So now the question to ask ourselves is that, am I working in unity in the goals, in the plans, in my work, so that whatever we're doing, we're making progress, we're moving forward to accomplish everything that we want to do? Moving on in the story, in verse 7, this is now God speaking, and he says, "Come, let us go down and there confuse their language, so that they may not understand one another's speech." So the Lord dispersed them from there over the face of all the earth, and they left off building the city. Therefore its name was called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of all the earth. And from there the Lord dispersed them over the face of all the earth. So these people, after they came together, they decided to build this tower. Then God came down and decided to confuse their language, and he decided to disperse them over all the earth. Why did God decide to confuse the language and to disperse them over all the earth. Well, if you go back in the beginning, we learned that God gave to Noah and Adam the command to fill the earth. And what these people were trying to do was contradictory to God's command of filling the earth. These people were trying to build a tower that would have a top in the heavens. So instead of filling the earth, these people were basically trying to fill the air. And that was against God's command. That did not go align with what God told Noah and what God told Adam to do in the beginning, which was to fill the earth. So God himself had to come down, confuse the languages so that these people will stop understanding one another, and they will disperse each other. They will disperse everyone over the whole earth. So this was really the reason why this happens, how we went from one language to many language. It was so that we can be dispersed and fill the whole earth instead of filling the air. So to conclude the message, what are the key takeaway lessons that we can take for ourselves in order to grow? Well, the first one is straightforward, which is to fill the earth and not the air, because our divine mandate, as God said, is to fill the earth. So in whatever we're doing, the intention must be so that we can multiply, so that we can grow and fill the earth and not the air. And the second key takeaway lesson, and this is an important one, which is to know that impossible outcomes are a result of things that begin in division. If we want outcomes that are possible, if we want outcomes that are achievable, if we want outcomes that are good, then we must begin in unity. When we begin in unity, we're setting ourselves for success, we're setting ourselves for greatness and for good from the beginning. But when we begin in division, from the beginning, we're already setting ourselves for disappointment, we're setting ourselves for getting hurt, we're setting ourselves for things that will be difficult and challenging, for things that will basically be impossible to achieve because of the root of division. Anything that begins in division is basically just a bomb waiting to explode. And we need to also know that unity is a fertile soil for possible outcomes. So the last and final question that we need to ask ourselves is that, am I living a life of unity, or am I living a life of division? If you're already living a life of unity, then keep it up, you're a saint. If you, like most normal people, like all of us in some way, there is some sort of division that's going on, and that is where we need to work on. We need to improve ourselves in order to grow. So we need to do a self-evaluation and assess, how can I be a better person, and what are the areas in my life where there's division, and go into those areas and challenge yourself to nurture unity. And so that's how we will grow. So that's it for the story time of today. I hope that this added value to your life. Make sure you like the video, you share it with someone who will benefit from this video, and you also leave a comment, give some feedback with anything that resonated with you, or any comments that you may have from anything that was said here. I'll see you in the next video.